Russia was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And they'd say, oh, but aren't you so glad that you're in America? I said, well, I know a lot of Russian filmmakers, and they have a lot more freedom than I have. All they have to do is be careful about criticizing the government.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Miles, and I will be one of your hosts today for a special episode of This is Revolution Podcast, more of a pop life edition. I get to have a fun co-hosting gig today with my good friend JG Micheal of Parallax Views. We'll be doing cross stream. This should be streaming on his channel as well. For those of you that usually watch JG, welcome to This is Revolution. Let me bring in my special guest co-host right now, JG Micheal.
How's it going?
It's going great, man. This was a lot of I'm really excited to do this because our guest doesn't know, but I reached out to him a while back. I wanted to get him on the show. He's a busy man, and I'm sure it fell into the massive inbox of nowhere. But when we put our powers together, JG,
Indeed.
and we were able to nail this down. I did watch Society right beforehand. I was lucky enough to have enough time to do that. Get a good rewatch in to really appreciate that movie once again. Watched it with some people that had never seen it, so that's always fun too. And have them go, whoa, what the fuck? That was pretty cool. Well, do you want to introduce our guest?
So we're going to be speaking with Brian Yuzna, who I think is one of the most interesting genre filmmakers. I would say he works in horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. His movies include Society, The Dentist 2, the Reanimator films, which are cult classics, the underrated Rottweiler, and many others. I believe he was also involved with, was it Honey, I Shrunk the Kids? I guess we'll find out.
Ooh, that's some deep cut trivia right there. Please welcome filmmaker Brian Yuzna.
Hello.
Thank you oh so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. I can't imagine if you reached out for me to be on your podcast. I don't know when. I'm just telling you, I mean, this is very special, but I never say no. So
I could have gotten
I think your email must have gotten put into the kind of
junk folder.
Thing. Yeah, because I pretty much am always game to talk about, myself.
Were you involved?
We all right? Is it? Yeah, I originated that movie with Stuart Gordon, my partner, in right here where I am, right in the backyard. We were having a barbecue. We both have a bunch of kids.
Mm-hmm.
We're family guys, and Stuart. We just made a few horror movies. I think we'd made Reanimator. We were working on From Beyond and Dolls, and Stuart said, we should do a movie for our kids. And I said, well, I always imagined when I was a kid, I'd pretend I was real small and the grass would be huge and the bugs would be riding on a beetle. And he said, oh yeah, we should call it The Teeny Weenies. It's about a father shrinks his kids, throw them out in the backyard. It's all about coming home. So right at that barbecue, we kind of came up with the basics of the story. And then Stewart, being such a, he was quite respected theater director from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
I was a nobody, always have been. But he had quite a career as a theater director, and he had lots of friends, and he had good representation, which means he had a top agent. And so we were in Rome shooting Dolls and From Beyond, and he got us a meeting with Disney to pitch it, because we had told each other, he said, this should be a Disney movie with Fred McMurray, should be one of, the Shaggy Dog. So that's what we wanted to do. And so actually on the plane over to LA from Rome, Stewart got out a yellow pad and we came up with the treatment.
Really?
During the flight. And then when we got to LA, we had a meeting at Disney and we pitched it to David Hoberman, who was an executive there.
Mm-hmm.
And Stewart was, of course, getting good response to Reanimator. He got it was just a cheap horror movie,
Mm-hmm.
but because he was such a experienced director of theater, it was much better than you would have expected. And so we got really good reviews from like Pauline Kael and all these. And so and it's very well done.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we got to pitch to Jeffrey Katzenberg.
And Katzenberg.
At that time, it was Eisner and Katzenberg.
Yeah.
And so we pitched to him, and then he took us to lunch in the executive dining room at Disney.
And
where everybody's looking at you.
Uh-huh.
And he said, you know what, we want to do this, but you got to change the title, because that title, Teeny Weeny, it sounds like a low budget porn movie. And so then we started, it just went forward and we started developing it while we were shooting From Beyond. And it came all the way around to where we were going to do it. And somebody came up with the title of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, which I think was brilliant. And we got Ed Naha, who had written Dolls, to write it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we were all kind of out of our depth, because we're used to making movies with, just us, let's put on a show in the barn,
Yeah.
We had Stewart was used to running his theater,
Mm-hmm.
and I never liked working for anybody, and I didn't know what I was doing anyway. I never had any experience. I had no training to be in the movies or anything like that. And so all of a sudden we're thrown into a bigger situation. But more than that, it was a situation where they were very talented, very high-powered people
Mm-hmm.
who didn't like the fact that you had one of the slots for a movie. Because at that time, Disney made like 8 movies a year.
Mm-hmm.
And they had people with housekeeping deals, big-time producers, big-time directors.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, these 2 idiots get a slot. We get one of the movies going forward. And so, of course, all of a sudden, you're in the Shark Tank. People are actually working against you. It was very, very stressful. We shot it in Mexico. I had moved my family down there.
That's where I live now.
My kids were in Mexico City.
Okay.
DF, DF, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that where you are?
No, I'm in Baja.
Oh, okay. And so it's Churubusco Studios.
Mm-hmm.
They were building, no digital. So every blade of grass took like 5 guys to carry. We had 5, I think, of the 8 big studios there. We took over Churubusco. And unfortunately, the stress of the whole thing got to the point where Stuart has always had high blood pressure, and at one point the stress got so bad, and he said he had to pull out, and it was just, we'd already cast and everything, and so when that happened, it was all of a sudden it was a big insurance claim, and ultimately Joe Johnston got the job to pick up for Stuart, and he had his own producer, and so Stuart and I were out. I mean, we made a lot of money on it, but it was very disappointing ultimately.
I do want to ask this before, I know JG has some questions to ask you. I do want to ask this one follow-up question before I give the floor to JG. How did you get out of that big studio system when you kind of jump in the deep end of the pool, so to speak, in, you know, doing this big Disney movie, which gets what, 2 or 3 sequels? Was it 3 sequels or 2?
Well, they had a TV one, and
they had the TV show.
Well,
they had
I never got into the studio system. Stuart did.
Okay.
Stuart actually got a housekeeping deal at Disney and had an office on the lot, but he kind of ran into a brick wall too, because the only thing he ever got made out of that was the Wonderful Ice Cream Suit, which you might not even know of, or which was a play he did at the Organic Theater in Chicago. And it's just, you know, it's a lot of politics in the studio, and you've got to, you know, I guess if you've got a big hit, then you've got the next one. So I was never in it. I don't think I didn't even know about what the studio business was like when I came out. You have to understand that I didn't even come out to LA to make movies until I was in my 30s.
Smart move.
I never took a class. I never, you know, I was a hippie. I lived in communes, and I was a carpenter, and I had an art supply. I used to paint paintings. I had a bar.
I was gonna say real quick, wasn't Stuart a bit into the hippie counterculture scene too, with his own theater work?
He was definitely also of that generation. And, you know, we grew up in the 60s. So I think Stuart might have been a year or 2 older than me. But I graduated high school in 67, which was the summer of love. And of course, I was involved with, you know, I went at that time, everybody was into politics, right? And so it was all, you know, they shut down the college, and I went to these big anti-war marches in DC, and you know, all these big movement things. And then of course I was also taking a lot of LSD and stuff, right? Because that was also part of the whole thing. And then, you know, Timothy Leary said, turn on, tune in, drop out. So I did it. And then I moved out into the country. I mean, it was very difficult to do that, really. I mean, it was really, really hard to step out of the whole program, right? Coming out of the 50s. If I had been born 5 years earlier, of course, I wouldn't have. It just happened to be that moment in time. And I was, you know, seeking myself, and I was involved in the, you know, I was in the whole kind of hippie movement and stuff. And I ended up out in the country. This was in North Carolina, and it was a kind of a community of like communes, and some were the one that I lived next door. I had my own place. I always kept a job. And the best hippies, the best communists, their parents sent them money. But my parents never did, right? So, you know, to be, you know, it's hard to be really countercultural unless you have a source of income. So I was always going into town and pounding nails. And that was kind of a little bit politically incorrect, but I did have some people living in teepees in my back field. I had a farmhouse. I had a farm, right? And so, but there were some that were very political, right? Super political. And then others that were more ecological, and some that were more music and let's have a good time, bands. So it was sort of it was kind of a community, but it, and there was always a lot of drugs, you know, but it was, ultimately what happened is the revolution didn't happen. So that was the big, you know, all of a sudden you dropped out, you went into the agrarian, you went out into the country, and then the revolution didn't happen. And things just kept inching along, slogging along. And then it was like, gee, and I quit college. I didn't learn the trade. And I'm getting a little too old to kind of not have some, I mean, I didn't even have a toilet in my house, you know?
Oh, you were, that's a real communist,
outhouses.
right?
Oh, we all had outhouses. And at one point, you just don't want to live that way.
Exactly.
And so then you have to figure out how to make money. And as I went through my 20s and figured out ways to make money, at one point, I did a lot of art generally. And one of the things I did photography, and I had a kind of a developing studio and stuff in my house, which of course today you don't need any of that crap, right? But I had this nice Nikon camera, and this guy borrowed it. He went traveling and he lost it. And so he came back, and instead of paying me for the Nikon, he gave me one of these 60mm Bolex cameras, which in the 60s and 70s had been used for TV news gathering. So they were these cameras that had like 100 feet of film, 3 lenses, no sound. They were wind up. There was no battery or anything. You just wound them up, and then you could shoot for a minute. And you choose your lens, and that's what they used to have for TV news. But what happened was that in the early 70s, they got 3/4 inch video. So when 3/4 inch video came in, they could make a camera small enough to shoot on video. And then you don't have to develop it. So you don't have to rush it to the lab and stuff. It's developed right in the camera. So all of a sudden, everybody started shooting on, you know, the news crews everywhere started shooting 3/4 inch video, you know, when they go on location. And so they were dumping all these Bolex cameras. So I got one of them. And then I thought, well, I'm going to shoot film, you know. And at that time, I had a place in the country on a river. I had about 15 goats. I had a bunch of turkeys and stuff. And so I would just shoot my goats, right? And then I got a projector, and I'd sit at my house and watch the black and white footage. And I went, wow, this is like Bergman. I was like, whoa, because, you know, back in the 60s, everything was the French New Wave. Right? We loved Fellini and Bergman and Godard and Truffaut. And, it was all, you know, art movies were the thing, you know, that was it. And I was always a big movie fan. And of course, always a horror fan. But when you know, in the 60s, there was a lot of art film type stuff. And so then I thought, man, I'm going to shoot a movie. And so I put an ad in a little shopping rag in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and said, I'm looking for some, I had no idea how to do it. And some guy answered my ad and said, I just graduated from in the radio, television, motion picture department. And I'm getting unemployment, so I'll just I'll do it for nothing. And so I wrote a script and we started shooting. I had no idea what I was doing. I knew that I asked my friend, I said, well, just a minute now. I know that the director says action, but what does the producer do?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, you see, the producer's the boss and the producer makes the most money. And I said, oh, well, that's what I want to be, because I've always preferred being the boss, and I've always preferred making the most money. But I didn't realize, of course, till much later that the director gets all the credit.
There you go.
Hey, I'm just saying.
So, Brian, I have to ask, before we get into society, you and Stuart both were put on the map by Reanimator, From Beyond, and Dolls. And I believe all those movies were either distributed by or post-production was handled by or in part produced by Empire Pictures, Charles Band's, outfit. And I think people forget Charles had a really well-oiled machine at that time. He later went on to do the Puppet Master movies, for people that are unfamiliar, which were really successful in the 90s. And, what was it like working in the sort of wild world of Charles Band, Empire Pictures, and just that sort of 80s milieu of filmmakers?
It was ethically challenged.
I got that impression when I read Charles' biography. So.
Well, I've never read. I don't think I want to read his biography. I lost too much money with him. But when I first came, I did a amateur film in hold one second.
Mm-hmm. Uh-oh. He's got an emergency. He got out of there quick. One of the goats just ate a turkey.
The Reanimator got to him.
There's a shunting going on in his house.
Yeah, no goats. No. But anyway, I made an amateur film and it was awful. But I got in. I really liked I really got into the process of making a movie. I started getting that. And back then, of course, you had to learn everything from books, right? There's no tutorials. I mean, today, Jesus Christ, you can take your phone and shoot them. You can do it all with downloads. I mean, it's amazing, right? But back then it was different. You had to get professionals involved. You had to have labs. You had to have all this equipment. And I won't go into the whole story, but I at one point I started realizing, wow, I think making movies would be the most fun thing to do, And so how can I do that? I want to do it professionally. Now I will digress and say that at one point I had gone down to South America with my girlfriend, and we were kind of backpacking around. And we were in Cartagena, Colombia, and we kind of got a bus out to the Santa Marta, which is a beach town. And we had no money, and we were backpacking. And as we went out of Cartagena, or we went past this big movie shoot, a big one. I forget what I think at one point I figured out what movie. It's an American. It was a big movie production, and as we were going by, I recognized that it was a movie shoot because I had seen Truffaut's Day for Night, and in Day for Night they show a movie shoot, and that's kind of what I knew about how you make movies. I said, "Wow, they're shooting a movie there." And then we got our little pensione in Santa Marta, and it was right, it was across the road from the beach. And I don't even think we had windows because we couldn't afford a room with windows. And so we went out to have dinner, into this open air restaurant and had like some Mariscos. And we're sitting there, and these 3 glistening black Jeeps come zooming up, and out spills people from the production. They're wearing sunglasses at night. They're all glamorous and sexy and having fun. And they pile around some tables just like right next to us, having the best of time. And I remember looking at them and going, I'm on vacation, they're working, and they're having a much better time than I am. And I thought, maybe the movies is kind of a place to go. But anyway, at one point I wanted to make movies, and I put an ad, and I realized that I had no idea what I was doing as a director. I really didn't have any idea about making movies. I just did it by doing it. And so I put a little ad, a 1-inch ad in Weekly Variety. And I said, horror movie director wanted. And I put my address. And this is before fax machines. And I got like hundreds of letters. And so then I got a ticket. I bought an air ticket to LA, and I went out and interviewed people. And the first guy that I went to see was Dick Miller, by the way.
Really?
Wanted to direct a horror movie. And some of the people that I met then, I still know. But it was just from letters and going out and meeting people. And then at one point, I started going to LA. Because, I mean, I had asked people back in North Carolina that were in the exhibition industry. I just wanted to see anybody that was in the business. I had no idea about it. And I remember we met one guy who had been out in Hollywood. And he said, I want to go to Hollywood. And he says, hookers and thieves, hookers and thieves. It was like, you don't go to LA, you know. And when I came out here, all of a sudden I found everybody like me was here, because back then you couldn't be in the movie business, and really, unless you went to LA. It's like being in fashion. You go to Milan, or cars, and you go to Detroit or something. And so all of a sudden I was meeting people that were from all over the country and world, and they were just like me. They wanted to make movies. They couldn't do it at home. And it was like young movie maker summer camp. You know?
Do you think that's changed a lot, though?
Oh, well, it certainly has, because now anybody can make a movie anywhere. The business is really dispersed. I think what you don't get, and I know this because a friend of mine and I have a little business, it's not very profitable, in which we try to handle these no-budget movies that people make. You know, people are always making these no-budget movies. They're kind of amateur. It's a sort of a substrata of the movie business, and really they just circulate it among themselves and stuff. And I started meeting some of these folks and telling them, you know, they're making the movies for nothing, you know, $15,000, $30,000, $50,000, like that, like no budget stuff. But they're going to do it one way or another. And I said, well, you know what? If you call me, contact me before you make it, and let me give you some advice. You're going to do it anyway, so maybe you could get your money back. Because if you don't get your money back, you have a hobby. If you recoup, it's a business, even if just a little bit. So why not do it as a business? Why not try? Because it means if you get your money back, it means somebody's watching it. If you don't, probably nobody watched it, you know, and you want people to watch it. And so I sort of started with that, and now we even do some domestic distribution, and we are like producers reps. We'll help them get a foreign sales deal, because nobody, thing about the movie business, everybody wants to make the movies, but nobody wants to do the business. And I always, because I came into it from the business side of things, I'm all about, I know that you want to be able to sell your movie. You want to be able to get the money back. Okay, you can be as artistic as you want, and if you don't care if anybody watches that movie, that's fine. It's all very personal. It's very subjective. But if you want to have an audience, you not only have to know how it's going to get to the audience, and to get to it, a lot of people have to make something on the way. And the hardest thing is knowing the contracts. Now, if I had been more sophisticated, Empire Pictures wouldn't have stolen millions from me. But when you go out to LA to make movies and you put money in a movie, the lamb gets fleeced, because you just want to be in the business. So from my point of view, so that's what I try to, and I can make a few bucks and also be involved in this. I can't make no budget movies. Nobody's going to work for me for nothing, right? You know,
everyone thinks you're rich.
Oh, work for me for free. You know, oh, sure, right. But if you're some guy in fucking Dayton, Ohio, and you want to make a movie, you do get your friends to do it for free. You do get people pitch in. And really what everybody wants is for that movie to get seen and to have some kind of profile. So that's what we try to, what we try to provide. I forgot how I got off on that. Now I'm pitching.
Well, I mean, how do you feel though? Because anybody can make a movie right now. You're right. You know, if you have a camera phone, they're pretty great cameras on these newfangled doohickeys called camera phones.
Come on, man. Much better than what we used to shoot on, probably.
So, and
you don't have to have a light meter. You don't have to deal with the lab.
Super easy.
It's amazing. And you download Final Cut, and
look, you stop talking about me on air.
You mix it yourself. Jeez, you don't have to have a professional involved.
I'm in the process of finishing up a video. We call it video essays, or a documentary about the way we consume media, called kayfabe. I juxtaposed wrestling and media, pro wrestling and media, and we're in the process of finishing that up. And yeah, most of it's just found footage and Final Cut. I have a ripped version of Final Cut on a very old computer. It is hard to get these things seen.
Contact me. I'll help you with the deal.
You know, it's funny.
You know, contracts are very tricky. That's the toughest thing, because, I was trying to make a video game deal, and the lawyers that I deal with said, hey, we're not video game people. And you look at those, I can make a movie deal, movie distribution, movie production, movie financing. I know how those deals work. You go to video games, you're kind of like, whoa, what are you talking about? So people who have not been in the movie business go to the markets and stuff. You make a movie, why would you know how the deals work, how the contracts work? And it's all about the contracts, And even the lawyer you get back in Dayton, they're not in that business. So then you need a LA lawyer. Well, you can't, the fucking LA lawyer is going to cost you as much as your damn movie.
No, that's very true. That's very true. JG, I know you had some questions.
Well, I was going to say, getting into society, I was really interested in talking about society because I think I told you, Brian, I've talked to Zeph Daniel, who helped write Society, and I know the story of this movie really changed over time. It sort of started in Zeph's mind as a sort of satanic cult story, and he has his whole own backstory about that and why he wanted to do that type of story. but over time it evolves into something very different. So how did society come together, and how did the story evolve? Because my understanding is it starts out as like a satanic cult slasher and then turns into this insane sort of body horror movie. So
here is the script that Rick Fry, Zeph, or Woody Keith as he is known then, gave to me that we made into society. So if you read this, you would see that it's a lot different from what the movie was. But what really was there is this paranoid feeling that there's some kind of world, some kind of thing going on that we don't know about. And there's an incredible feeling of paranoia from that. I had just spent a year working with Dan O'Bannon, who you might know, he made Return Living Dead.
Mhm.
and I think he wrote Alien, right?
Wrote Alien, and he was a weirdo, a super weirdo. And I would work with him late at night at his house. And we were working on a project called The Men. And it was his idea. It was about a woman that discovers that all men are aliens. Now, this is 1987. Now, today, this movie doesn't really work because we're not so binary in our versions of sexuality or gender. But back then, it was really crazy cool, really fun. And it was a woman who just discovers this, and it's very genre, very monster. And she's realizes that her whole idea of what the world is totally, she's been wrong. There's this incredibly weird thing going on. Dan O'Bannon, right when I got some financing for it, he backed out. And I was really let down. And I was trying to, I felt bad about that. And then Rick Fry came up and gave me the script. And I read it and I went, wow, this has the same paranoia that The Men had, except it's about a kid and his family. And this kid and it's inexplicable, especially at the beginning. It's like, what could be going on? It's too weird. And not only that, the kid has got nothing to complain about. He's in the top of the food chain. He's a Beverly Hills kid, class president, sports star, everything. He has everything going for him. And he feels alienated from his parents, which I think every adolescent does, right? Everybody at one point goes, I must be adopted. I can't be the offspring of these weirdos. So I love that about it. But it kind of, from my point of view, after the buildup, it was kind of a blood cult or something. And even at the end, Bill is still living with his parents. It's not like anything changes. He just kind of goes, "Oh my God, how could this be?" Now I know Woody Zeph very well, and Rick Fry, and I know how it evolved, and so I'm very familiar with all that, and I really understand where it's coming from Zeph. I really understand that. It's coming from childhood trauma. But what I was looking for was something, I just glommed onto it. And then and I immediately optioned it, and we started working on it. And my approach was, I thought a couple things. And back then, I must say, I didn't stop to think much. I was younger. I mean, of course,
Mhm.
for my first directing, I guess I was about almost 40 when I first directed a movie. Um, but I was like just I had 4 kids by then,
Oh wow.
and I really had to make money, and I had decided to make money making movies, so I was driven, and so when I saw that, I liked it. I had a friend that was making cheap movies, and this is right when the Honey I Shrunk the Kids thing, when Stewart bailed on that. I mean, he didn't bail. For health reasons, he had to leave it, and all of a sudden I didn't have that, and then the Men, Dan O'Bannon bailed out, and I had a deal where my friend was making movies that they were financed by Japanese investors,
Mhm.
and the partner was he was a Brit. They were both Brits, but the partner was a Brit who lived in Tokyo and had a family there and was doing business there. So he could, back then the Japanese just had tons of money and they were investing in all kinds of stuff. So he was financing his productions through Japanese money, and they were, and so I went to him because I'm more comfortable working with people who own their own businesses, just because that's the way I am, and I never learned about how the studio system works and stuff. And so I told them, listen, I've got I own Reanimator. I own Reanimator because I raised the money to pay for it, so I own it, and I own then the sequel. But instead, I could have gone to New Line or some studio and said, do you want to do the sequel to Reanimator? I'm sure I could have done that. But instead, I went to him and I said, look, I thought at that point I wanted to direct. And I said, look, I'll make the sequel with you guys, but I want it to be 2 movies, not just one. I want 2 movies that I'll direct and produce. And the Reanimator sequel will be the second one. And the reason I did that was because I had this French distributor had told me once. He said, we'll usually say that most first-time directors make 2 movies with their first movie, their first and their last. Because once you make a movie, now you've got a track record. It's easier to make your first movie than your second one. And also of course, there's also this thing about the sophomoric second one, but that's a little different. But the point is that I thought, I've never taken a film class. The only thing I know about making movies is being on the set and hiring people. And it's likely that I'll be terrible as a director. So I want a second chance. So I said, I want to make the Reanimator sequel as the second one, because that's the one they wanted. And you have to finance the first one. So that was the deal I made with a company called Wild Street Pictures. And then we were looking, and they had the financing, and I was looking for a movie. So I found, so Rick Fry just came up to me. I was coming out of my office. He came up and gave me the script. And so I went and looked at it. I said, wow, I've been living in this paranoid world of the Men. I get this world. I love this world, where you think that there's something going on you don't know about. And but I didn't like the ending. I didn't like the denouement of it. And then the Japanese had asked me, so I started kind of developing it with them in another direction. So when I looked at the script, one thing that stood out, there were a couple of things that stood out to me. One was that it was there was a strong sense of incest.
Mm-hmm.
And I had read some horror movie criticism books in which they said that horror movies very often, they're really focused on taboos, that things that, the taboos of our society. And one of the biggest taboos is incest. And a lot of horror movies have stories that are around that, because we're dealing with taboos, and that's one that's pretty universal. And then the other thing was that this was a movie about a super rich kid. It was all about this Beverly Hills society, which is where Zeph, who used to be Woody Keefe, that's where he was from. So he wrote that with a kind of authenticity I could never have written. I have no idea about people with a lot of money. I never had a lot. My parents didn't have a lot of money. They were immigrants. And so that's not the world I knew. But he did. He knew that, and he wrote what I considered a satire. I don't think he thought it was a satire. You could ask him. But I think with him, it was almost like I think it was more like a therapy type of thing that he was story writing.
And just to clarify, so Woody Keith or Zeph, he co-wrote this with Rick Fry. So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I would say, yeah, of course, but I always say Zeph, Woody, Rick Fry was a very important element of this, but the inspiration of it, the core of it, the nugget of it, came from Rick Fry. Was this egghead physicist guy that worked for, as an engineer. He has no idea about rich people. So obviously, but that's the way movies are made and scripts are made and stories are made. It's your collaborators, everybody brings something to the table. I could never have brought that story, a story about a rich kid in Beverly Hills. It's all paranoid and stuff. I'd driven through Beverly Hills. You know what I mean? I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I never knew rich people or people who were elite or something like that. I met, working in the movie business, I'd certainly met people who have become really, really wealthy and very famous. And I've met people who do have a lot of money, because you start bumping into some kind of financing things, but not as and I've worked internationally a lot. I've made, I think, as many movies in other countries as here. And when you travel like that, you do tend to all of a sudden be because you're the outsider, the foreigner, the American, you start being involved with political people that are, high up, and people who are just wealthy because you're from the outside. But in this country, I would never know, but, I don't know. I don't hang out with people who have a lot of money. I mean, I'm sure some people think I do, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about and plus you can see in the movie society what my opinion is anyway.
I was going to ask.
I'm not talking about nouveau riche.
You're talking about old.
I'm talking about the real capital that I don't know. I don't want to say runs the country.
You can say runs the country.
But that is the system.
The influences.
And
you're
talking, we're talking about. I mean, I believe that, right? Yeah. And I believe it because when I was a kid, I read everything. Not just horror stuff, but I read lots of political stuff when I was a kid in the 50s and 60s, and So I've read all the political kind of theory, or I don't know, theories or diatribes and stuff. And I lived through Johnson or Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Carter, Reagan, Newt Gingrich, all that stuff. And I see that and so I was kind of in the countercultural type of leftist political thing. And I kind of internalized a lot of it, right? Because not that I agreed with the extreme part of it, but you just, you get the message.
Yeah,
so
you really see in the movie Society, I mean, you really drive home the point of the reality of class. I mean, I remember you even have one character that says, I think to the Bill Whitney character, we've always been sucking off pores like you or whatever.
Low class shit like you. Right. And so when we released the movie, I wanted him to put on the poster a true story. I tried to get him to do it.
It's like what they always say about They Live, right? It's like a documentary.
Yeah, well, They Live was more about how media kind of brainwashes us, right? I mean, I was just riffing off of the script I got. So the script I got already had it was about rich people. And I don't think the script ever really took that as an issue, but I just thought that would be a fun thing to do. So when I saw that, I thought, you know what, I'd like to have a different monster because I'm a horror guy. And you got the werewolf, and you got this, and you've got Santeria, and you've got ghosts. And I thought, wow, I grew up during that tumultuous leftist time. And I thought, here's the perfect opportunity to do something different. And then the other part of it was the idea that his parents, he was really from a different world from his parents. And I thought that he would, he's a disaffected youth. I think in the original script, he's like adopted. He's not their kid. And I thought that the idea that, I tried to think at that time in the 80s, I've always been really into special effects. And that was the time which I call the invasion of the rubber guys in LA. They were just making cooler, weirder sculptures out of foam latex and all these kind of plastics. And every Nightmare on Elm Street movie that came out, they would have more cool, weird crap, Rob Bottin and Tom Savini. Tom Savini was more of a gore guy, but The Howling and the Thing and Nightmare on Elm Street, and they just kept doing cooler and cooler makeup and puppetry effects. And I was really into it. And this is pre-digital, of course. And I remember once I got that script, I said, I'm going to do this, and told my guys. And so we started moving forward. I had optioned it. I was working with the writers, and I just lay in bed at night and think, what would I like to see in a movie that I haven't seen? And I thought, well, I'd like to see flesh melding together. So I started imagining this idea, because that would be an effect I hadn't seen. It would be really kind of a horror effect and kind of cool and very surrealistic. And so then I started speaking with Zeph/Woody and Rick Fry, and we started trying to develop the class concept and bring the taboo, the incest, more into the foreground. And at that time, the Japanese had asked me to meet with Screaming Mad George, who's a Japanese he had a punk band, an art
Yeah, he's
punk
part of the whole
band in
punk
New
noise
York.
scene. Yeah.
Yeah. And so his name was Joe. He was born Joe Gitani, and he went to New York and had a punk band called the Mad, and it was an art punk band. And then, because he's an artist basically, and then he really liked Screaming Jay Hawkins, so he gave himself the name Screaming Mad George. And he is a real weird guy, right? Because back then he had blonde hair with colors and wore a lot of makeup, and he wore like kung fu boots, where the toes are separate and stuff. And he was into martial arts. And so, but I went to see him because he's Japanese. The financier said this might help us in Japan with the movie if we have him involved. And so I went to meet him, and I'm a real art guy, and I'm really into surrealism. And for example, with From Beyond, the first poster I came up with for From Beyond, I think it can still be found. I based it on a Salvador Dali painting, and so George was really into Dali. So I went to his place, and he had all these cool paintings, very surrealistic Dali-esque paintings, and he was really into like visual contradictions, like simulacrum and weird kind of visual things. And so we sat down and started talking about what by that time we were calling the shunting. And I think the name of because I wanted to have a big scene at the end. I always had this feeling that movies should end with a big blowout. And that I have realized that the reason I do is because when I was a kid, I saw the 10 Commandments, Cecil B. DeMille, and at the end they have this huge orgy with the golden calf, which was really sexual for being a family film for a little kid. And it really affected me. And I just feel like I always felt like movies should end like that, with just some weird orgiastic horror. And so to have this big ending, by that time with Rick and Woody /Zeph, we had been working on that idea. And I forget who it was that came up with the name shunting. I think it might have been Woody. And so by that time we were calling it the shunting. And then I went to George and I said, I have this idea about the flesh melding and stuff. And boom, 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 we were looking at Salvador Dali paintings, picking out certain ones to take elements from. And I think within a week or 10 days, he had little maquette sculptures made, and he went to town on it. And in fact, this is the best representation, Society, the shunting. It's the best representation of George's art, I think, that there is. I mean, it was the one time his stuff really fit the movie,
Yeah, because I was going to say he's worked on a lot of other movies. I think he even worked on Nightmare on Elm Street 4 and Predator.
He did the Roach Motel.
Yeah, yeah.
Did he?
but I feel like Society is really his. It seems like it's his most pure expression of the type of art he enjoys. Because I've seen his. I don't know if you guys know, but he had a video game that he made, like a pinball video game in Japan, and you can tell what his sort of aesthetic tastes are from seeing stuff like that. So I think Society is probably the best expression of his sort of artistic tastes.
Absolutely. And the other one, really, although it was not a successful movie and pretty much, was Silent Night, Deadly Night 4 Initiation. And that was where George and I kind of went off our rockers. And just
with the bugs and Clint Howard.
Well, we really didn't, we weren't moored. We were at sea with that. And we were just, because with George, George and I would just go crazy with ideas, artistic ideas. And then and that's kind of the way I made movies anyway, is I always thought if I just go far out enough, I'll pull it back to the story and it'll be very cool. And sometimes that doesn't work. There's some great cool ideas in Initiation, but I think we were pretty unmoored on that. But that was really a lot of George stuff, but certainly, and I'd worked with George many times and I would always call on him. But I would never try to get George to help me do regular special effects, because I just thought this is it's a waste. You take an artist and then you try to have them do something ordinary. Get someone to whom they love that. And I would never go, George, hey, I need a head cut off here. Of course he can do it, but it's like wasting him. Whereas you can get guys who are just dying to show you what they can do with the decapitation.
Interesting.
I was just going to add to that. I'm glad you mentioned Initiation, Silent Night, Deadly Night 4. Also, I think Zeph helped write that, and you can tell the cult obsession is there too. But I think that's an underrated one. And, I really like how the films you've worked on, I think you probably were working on modest budgets, but they still look very professional. And I think society looks very professional. How were you able to juggle budgets and also making the film really look slick, professional, keeping that air to it?
I'm not sure. I think Reanimator is super cheap. And I think that worked because we had a theater director who was almost like a genius. And he knew how to, he could take those limitations and my God, the acting and directing, I would say the acting and story directing, I never felt like Stewart his strength wasn't cinematic directing. His strength was taking a bunch of actors and really telling a story and knowing what it should be. I always struggle with that when I try to make a movie. It's so hard to figure out what the story is. And then you have to have the facility of dealing with actors, which I've stumbled with always. Because I've never been an actor. I never had any experience. And Stewart, from the time he was in high school, was directing and acting and doing this stuff. By the time he made Reanimator, he had been a successful theater. He had been the creative director of a theater in Chicago for like 10 years. So that really worked on a very low budget, although there was a lot of deferments. With Society, it had a bigger budget than Reanimator. And I'm not sure. I think we just, I don't know. We did the best we could, and of course, the thing about Reanimator, it's mainly the third act. It's mainly about the effects, With Initiation, that was a cheapie, because that was a guy named Richard Gladstein who worked at a company called LIVE, Live, which you probably would recognize as being the company whose president, Menendez, was killed by his kids. Remember that?
Yeah.
That happened while we were doing movies over there.
Whoa.
And if you think about it, there's a lot in common, I think, with the Menendez brothers and Zeph. You look at the stories they have and stuff, and I don't know. I don't think, it doesn't make sense for these guys to do what they did. But that's another topic. In any case, Richard Gladstein, Live was a big video distributor, and Live was they were picking up movies all the time. This was the heyday of VHS, before DVD even. And Richard Gladstein had come out. The second movie I did for Wild Street was Bride of Reanimator. So I did the sequel to Reanimator, and then when we were finishing it, we were looking for a distributor, and Richard Gladstein came over from Live, and he picked it up and put it out. I mean, it wasn't much of a theatrical release, but he picked it up, and we became friends. And he told me that he wanted to get into production, and that he had gotten Live to agree to let him pick up the rights to a sequel, an IP, a franchise, and that was Silent Night, Deadly Night. And there had been two of them, and the first one had done well. The box office, kind of infamous. Second one kind of dropped off, and then he picked up the rights for probably very little, and they told him he could make the sequels within a certain budget, and there had to be an actor off this list of 50 or 60 names.
Is that why you got Maud Adams?
Yeah, because she was one of those actors. And so this was a formula during the VHS era when Blockbuster was Netflix, right? And so the first one he did was I forget the name of the director, but he did Two Lane Blacktop.
Monty Hellman.
Monty Hellman. And because Richard also had kind of a arty kind of bent, because his dad had a company he's New Yorker, and his dad had a kind of a famous record store called Colony Records. And so he kind of I'm like a exploitation guy. I mean, I love art movies from the 60s, the new wave and all that. And I love
Did you grow up on the Arkoff American International Pictures type stuff, or?
Well, yeah, in the 50s, I was, William Castle, Roger Corman, and all these things, of course. Obviously, look at Dolls. We put Mr. Sardonicus in it. Why do you think?
Yeah, Guy Rolfe. Yeah.
Yeah, because we're William Castle people, and of course I love Bergman and all those things, but I would never make those because the first movie I made, I raised the money. I risked my future to make Reanimator, and by God, I wasn't going to do so. I thought, I love horror, and I trust my taste in horror. I'm not sure I trust my taste to make a successful art movie or a successful drama, maybe even a successful comedy. But when it comes to horror and fantasy and stuff, I feel like I get it, And so that's where I went, because I couldn't afford not to recoup. Now Richard, I don't think he was never that guy. He wasn't a horror fan, but he could appreciate it. And so when he picked up Bride of Reanimator, then he was making the Monty Hellman movie, and then he said, "Hey, do you want to do one of these? I can do another sequel to Silent Night, Deadly Night." And he already had a script written by some other people at Live, by some women executives, or at least one who had some partners, and they had made a story about this kind of a little bit of a feminist thing about a coven of witches, and but they still had the main character from Silent Night, Deadly Night. I forget his name. Which in the third one, I think he had a plastic.
Yeah, the fishbowl. I think his name was Ricky. And it's weird because you do have a character named Ricky in Initiation. right?
You know, the thing is that I needed a job. It didn't pay much, but I needed a job. And like I said, I had 4 kids, man. And and Richard was offering it. And he kind of indicated that we could do whatever we wanted with that script. So at that time, George and I were going bonkers, and so was Zeph, right? So we were all kind of crazy idiots, you know, kind of with more ideas than technique. And so I said, sure. And so we started developing it, and it turned into Initiation, which arguably, I mean, it was very cheap. It's arguably, you know, not very good. But on the other hand, we kind of shot our wad, you know. And then after that, while I was producing Guyver,
Right, the Screaming Mad George directed movie, yeah.
and Steve Lang, and Screaming Mad George, Richard came out to the set. We were out in Simi Valley or something, and he said, "Hey, do you want to do another Silent Night?" And I felt bad by then because, see, when I did that part 4 Initiation, I subverted the whole idea of a Santa Claus killing.
Mhm.
I didn't want to do that. And so I didn't. So I even made the main character Jewish, you know, and I didn't do any of that stuff, right? And then afterwards, I thought, well, you idiot, you know, why would you subvert? You can do a fucking Christmas horror with the killers, you know, why did you do that? I have no idea. I was out of my mind, what can I say? But I felt bad about it. And so I thought, when Richard came out, I said, yeah, I've got an idea for another one. And I wanted to make up for having like not done a Christmas movie. And I said, it's Killer Toys. And it's about Joe Petto, the toy maker.
You know, I have to cut in for.
Pinocchio. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I loved how you mentioned back then you kind of had to get certain name actors or actors that had value that people would see on the cover and be like, okay, maybe I'll watch that.
It's got to be on the box.
Yeah. And I've always loved about Silent Night, Deadly Night 5, The Toy Maker. You get Mickey Rooney to be in it, who infamously protested the first movie.
He dumped on it. But,
did he realize it at that point?
Well, of course he knew what he was doing, but he got paid the fee, and he was great. He was just wonderful. On the Toy Maker, which I think the funny thing is that I had when I was developing Reanimator, simultaneously I was developing a script called Laughing Matters, a comedy with this writer-director named Martin Katroser. And he was in New York, because at that time I was just looking for a movie to make. I was crazy to make a movie, right? So going to New York, I was going to LA, I was meeting people. And so I was developing Reanimator with Stuart and Dennis Paoli. And I was developing Laughing Matters with Marty, because I liked his short film of it. It was about a cat burglar who was a stand-up comedian. And so he would, you know, he would joke when he would get caught. And I loved it, but when it started getting down to what are you going to jump on? What are you going to put your money on? I thought, man, if that comedy isn't funny, that's it for me. But with the horror movie, I'm going full bore with horror, you know, sex and gore, baby. I know there's an audience for that because I'm one of them, you know, and if it's not funny, the other one. So I went that way, and I was kind of felt a little bad because I'd left Marty Katroser a little, you know, he didn't, you know, we developed, we never made it. And so then it turned out when I was producing Guyver, I hired Marty as a script supervisor. He had become a script supervisor. And we had a very complicated shoot with 2 directors who each had their own unit. They're not like the Coen brothers where they sit together and do each scene. There was checkerboard scenes. They were shooting at the same time. It was very complicated. And Marty was the guy who was the only one who knew what was going on. And working with him as a script supervisor, he's the best one I ever worked with. And I've worked with some who were so terrible to the point where they might as well have not even been taking notes. And others, and he's the absolute opposite. He was the guy. And so when Richard came to the set, I told him, well, there's my idea and all this, but I want Marty to direct it. And I'll write it with him. Because it was my idea. And then so I thought, you know what? I want to make it up to Marty for not making laughing. I mean, that was in my mind, right? And so I put him on with it. So we got him, we co-wrote the script, and then Marty directed it. And we got Screaming Mad George to do the toys, which honestly, I think he was not the right guy to do the toys. Because once again, it's like Screaming Mad George should do really weird stuff. And the concept of the toys was mechanical things that could kill you. So it didn't quite work. And I think we made a mistake. We should have gone the Child's Play way, in which the toys were possessed of some malevolent spirit, so it could do anything. And yet we were sort of in this area where it should be more mechanical. And so I think that's the weakness of the movie. But luckily, when we brought in our name actor and we had the meeting, and Mickey Rooney came in, who at one point was the biggest movie star in the whole darn world, Mickey Rooney. And he comes in to do our crap little movie and play Santa Claus, play an actual killer Santa Claus. That was so great. And during the production, we had to hire his Winnebago and his assistant. And his assistant was his double, his picture double. I mean, his lighting double. So Mickey wouldn't even go out onto he would go talk about the blocking, but then he'd go sit in the Winnebago in the driver's seat and listen to the Santa Anita racing, the horse racing with his racing form. I mean, he's retro, right?
Yeah.
And I just hang out with him. He was short, kind of burly, and he was like almost double my age. But I'll tell you, I wouldn't get into a mess with him. He would flatten me. That guy was powerful, you know? And he was just really just the greatest guy, just so entertaining, so many stories. He just went totally into the whole story, to the whole picture, totally gave himself. And, you know, he told me once, he said, you know, Brian, you know what the most important movie in Hollywood today is that's in production? I said, what? He said, this one, because I'm in it. and that week he was on the Tonight Show, and he mentioned our movie. He promoted our movie because he was in it. And I thought, that's a star. That is the definition of a star.
Jason, if you don't mind, I had a few more questions about society, and Brian, if you don't mind as well.
No,
okay.
I care.
Well, I was going to ask. So I know that you've talked about this elsewhere, but I think this audience would be really interested in hearing more about it. I guess Society had a very different reaction or reputation, at least in, say, Europe, than it does in the U.S. when it came out. Or, you know, its cult following is different in different countries. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. Now, I'm such an I'm such an idiot, right? That I truly thought that Society was going to be the number one picture in the box office of America when it came out. I truly believe that. Now, I didn't, of course, I didn't realize so much back then, but my taste does not match up with America's taste. I wish I had the taste of Spielberg. What he loves, we all love. But what I love, very few people love. And also, I wasn't a particularly good director. I mean, I was a novice. I didn't know what I was, so I was clumsy with it. And so there's a lot about it that's kind of awkward and clumsy. Now, when it came out, and then I was not ready for the reaction with the mainstream reviewers on this movie. And there weren't many back then. This is before Rotten Tomatoes and all that. We're talking the trades, the big newspapers. And I remember Zeph and I were it was like the second or third day of shooting Bride of Reanimator. And we were on the set and we got Daily Variety that had the review of Society. Man, they could not have been more cruel. You know, I mean, it was awful. And then we're making another movie, you know. And even my friends, and when we finished this Bride, and even my friends kind of didn't like Society. It was kind of like, oh yeah, that's okay. They liked Bride of Reanimator. You know,
did the class
really that, huh?
Did the class element hit him too hard over the head? Because you're really
I don't know what it was. I think a lot of people, I don't know. I think a lot of
was it really backwards
I think
tits?
maybe I have to put it all on the shunting. I think there was I know the review in Variety was very derogatory, it was kind of homophobic. I mean, there was a sense that this was, I mean, I think they even called it that. They called it rough trade gay porn or something, you know.
Whoa.
I mean, it was like really, you know, just kind of missing the fun of it. I mean, I don't know. It was, to me, it was deliriously wonderful. I thought, man, I can't believe I got to do this. You know, it was, I mean, it was just seemed so great to me. And then it was, you know, and it didn't even come out here. And then the company that bought the US rights had also bought, it was a British company called Medusa. And they bought the British rights and they also bought the US rights. So they released it first in Britain, in the UK. And over there, it was released as a real movie. It got great reviews. Hey, even Sight and Sound magazine in the UK, which is like Cahir's the cinema for Britain. It was like, it's like the frou-frou cinema magazine. They even hired me to write an article, and it was quite successful there. But this is pre-internet. So you don't know what's going on in the rest of the world. You know, people tell you, oh, we got a release here. Billy Warlock went to London around that time, and he was on Baywatch then. And he told me he got off the plane and there were all these reporters going, hey, Society. And I said, really? I didn't believe it, kind of. I mean, not my world. I was busy. But then it was released here and it was like nothing. But in like UK, Society was seen as something good and Bride was seen as sort of embarrassing, Bride of Reanimator.
Really?
So it was just the opposite. And then I started realizing that in France, it was okay, and in Spain, in Italy, you know, so there were some European areas it seemed like maybe it did okay, and or was received okay. And then as time went by, it was like around 208, 207, it got kind of discovered. I think it was a new generation. And I have theories about that. I think some of the awkwardness or the weakness of the movie 20 years later is seen as, they don't see it as that, they see it as like the 80s. And I liken that to when J-horror was happening, the Japanese horror, The Ring and The Grudge and Dark Waters and all those. And I would watch them with my friends, those movies. And something would happen, they're the ones with the girl with the hair down in front of her. And I'd say, well, that's really ridiculous. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And they say, no, it's Japanese. That's Japanese. And then I'm thinking, well, when society was in Europe, they're thinking a lot of the kind of awkward parts, or the not good parts, they're going, well, that's America. That's kind of American teenage. But in this country, they go, that wasn't very good at all. And then later, when another generation in our country, I think the younger they come and they watch Society, and one, they've never seen anything like The Shunting because it wasn't seminal. Nobody ever did it again. It's like watching The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. You go, where are all the movies like Dr. They don't exist. But where are the movies like The Shunting? Well, they don't. I mean, some people have borrowed stuff from it, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I think the younger generation looks at it, and they look at everything from the 80s, from the VHS time, and they are very forgiving. They go, oh, that was the 80s. So I think time helps you get accepted,
It is interesting the way we revisit the 80s, especially the VHS era of horror. There seems to be, and I don't know if it's because there's so many Gen Xers like myself that grew up with the local video store and then cable TV, where I found most of these films. That it has a kind of a special, I don't even want to say a special place in my heart. Some of these movies are like ingrained on my DNA because I watched them so much on cable. Being a latchkey kid, Home Alone.
Well, it's like I am so forgiving of 70 horror movies. Let's Scare Jessica to Death.
I just watched that
when it came out.
Yeah,
it wasn't that good. I watch it now, and I go, wow, that is. There was something very honest about the storytelling, and I think there was a kind of honesty about the storytelling in the 80s as well. And you are right about this was the Reagan era. It was the greed is good. And there was a whole level, when Society was made, when it came out, it was not cool to not be into the greed is good thing.
Well,
I was going to say,
not cool at all. And in Europe, it's all the idea of class in this country back then was like, there's no class.
Yeah.
You work hard, you're going to get rich, And if you say, no, that's actually not true. Systemically, that's not true.
Now you come out of the new left kind of hippie movement of the 60s, and there's directors that we talk about on this show all the time that I feel the politics that they came out of influenced some of the filmmaking. Carpenter has They
Absolutely.
Live. You have Society. I mean, hell, Lucas has Star Wars.
Hey, Taxi Driver. You can't get away from it. You do represent the time you are in.
I was going to say, in regards to that class element, do you think one of the reasons it may have been rediscovered is, I mean, in the 2010s and before that, we sort of have the Occupy Wall Street movement and whatnot. Do you
Absolutely.
think that helped it?
Absolutely. I think the Great Recession, absolutely, I do. And I think that in this country, I think there is more, there was a huge crushing of any kind of socialist ideas in this country, coming from the the 50s with McCarthyism. And I'm not defending Stalin. You know what I'm talking about? I'm not talking about that.
Yeah.
I'm just talking about Roosevelt.
Yeah.
And Johnson. I think that there was a crushing of it. And you got to the point, and then Reagan, of course, took it and ran, and the whole putting down of anything that would kind of take any riches away from the big corporations and the billionaires and stuff. I mean, anything, it was all ridden on the back of racism and xenophobia. And that's what Reagan did. And then they had this whole thing in the 80s, which I lived through, in which all of a sudden it was like, hey, man, greed is good. I mean, didn't they say it in the Wall Street? Movie?
Right, in Stone's Wall
Greed
Street.
is good. And people believed it. They said, you know what drives our economy is greed, and corporations have no obligation to anybody, and they don't have any obligation to the community. They only have an obligation to make more money for the people that own them. And when you take that step, well, this is where we end up. If these huge companies have no responsibility, I mean, they pretty much run the economy, and yet they have no responsibility to the populace. And of course, they keep, and the populist politicians keep that, are financed by that, and then they keep it running by feeding off of xenophobia, racism, classism, sexism. It's the other, and hey, right now we're in an incredibly dangerous time where the right wing, kind of the dictatorial fascist forces, it's happening all over the world. It's not just here. This is what's going on. But I mean, in the 80s, Reagan changed it. What was basically the House of Representatives was basically a democratic institution coming out of Roosevelt.
Well, yeah, and you had Reagan crushing. I was going to say you had Reagan crush the Air Traffic Controllers Union, and
stop the union. But look what's happening now. There's strikes all over. Unionization is not dead. It's happening. It's happening all over. So I don't know. I think I don't know what they call the generation now. Taylor Swift generation or whatever it is, right? But I do think that there is. I think there is a imbalance in the Electoral College and in the Senate in terms of representation, because there's a real imbalance with how I get it that every state should be independent and stuff, but you look at that some senators represent like 500,000 people, and then in New York or California they represent like 20 million people. It's obviously not. I mean, is that right? I don't know. But I do think that there's hopefully it's the last gasp of a horrible creature, a horrible monster that's that's just going to try to bring down the temple
Mhm.
as they die, hopefully, right?
Mhm.
There was one more thing I wanted to ask you about Society. I know that the story is really centered on Bill Whitney, the character played by Billy Warlock. But I think I mentioned this to you in an email. For me, what makes the movie work is actually Devin Vasquez as Clarissa. And I've talked to Zeph about this. I feel like in the original script, he told me that the character was a bit different, a bit more sinister. Whereas in Society, you end up really, I felt really bad for her at certain points, you know, like she cares about Bill, but once he finds out what she is, you know, he's like put off by it. There's that one
Yeah.
moment where, you know, near in the third act, the shunting, where she helps him out and then he looks at her and he's like disgusted and she's all upset. She thought he was going to say, I love you or whatever.
Mhm.
And, you know, she's like, for me, a really important part of that movie. Also has the best line in that movie where she says, how would you like your tea? Cream, sugar, or would you like me to pee in it?
That's Zeph all over. I mean, that's Zeph. You know, the character didn't end up. I mean, I think the character originally, yeah, it was a more sinister character because in the script, in the original script, in this script, right, the very original script that was handed to me by Rick Fry, she is kind of sinister. But that's not where we took it. And as the script evolved, there were, you know, that coffee, tea, or would you like me to pee in it, or whatever it was, that was really all over her personality. And I'm not sure I don't think that character was, I think it could have been, I think that the original script had more of that than we ended up with. And I also think that it was something very difficult for Devin Vasquez because there's a lot of irony, there's a lot of subtext and irony and smart sarcasm that was originally with that character. And it's a very hard thing to act. And I wasn't a good enough director to bring that out. I think today I might could do it, but I was like a novice. I was a neophyte. And you know, it's really kind of funny because I was at a screening of a movie that I executive produced recently called Suitable Flesh. That's directed by Joe Lynch. It's a script that Stuart Gordon and I began, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, based on The Thing on the Doorstep, Lovecraft story. And Dennis Paley wrote a script for it, and then it went into hibernation. And then Barbara Crampton asked me if I knew of any projects. And I said, hey, Dennis has this really cool Lovecraft story. And so she, you know, Barbara Crampton now is like really a kind of a little mogul. She's a producer.
Yeah.
And so her partner, Bob Portal with Amp Films. So they got it, they developed it. They got Joe Lynch and, you know, it was made with Heather Graham and Barbara. We flipped the sexes of the main characters, where they did. And they had a screening at the Aero Theater in Santa Monica. I think it was last week. And I went to it. And when we were doing the pre-movie cocktails and stuff, I met the actress that we had originally cast for Clarissa. And she said, don't you remember me? I said, you fired me right before the shoot. You know? It was very, I mean, it's, of course, it's very awkward because I'm you know, the problem is when you know how it is, you live somewhere, you bump into everybody again and again. And, but she was very cool and said, you know, the thing is, I knew you were worried about the nudity. And she was like, I think she was in college at that time. And she said, and she was a great actress and very attractive and, you know, really studied acting. And she was great, but there was this feeling that she just wasn't going to go for the nudity. And for me, that was a big thing. And I told her, I said, you know, it was like the last minute, and I'd had her over to my house with the whole cast, and we had dinner, the whole thing. And then I started realizing that I think she felt uncomfortable with what was in the script. And I remember calling the producer, Keith Wally, just that weekend before we started shooting. And I said, you know, I don't think this is going to work. Let's take Devon. Because we had read Devon. And Devon she had been, the first night of shooting, she called up Sylvester Stallone to tell him she got the part. You know?
Oh, okay.
You know? And she was a girlfriend of Sly.
Yeah.
And she was so excited. And of course, she's gorgeous. I think she was a playmate or something. And so she didn't have a problem with the nudity because she was used to that. She wasn't as experienced of an actress, but she certainly was, you know, pedal to the metal, you know. And I told the previous Clarissa that I think part of what triggered me was that on Reanimator, we had already cast Megan very close to the time of shooting. And we were already doing scenes. We had a rehearsal hall, and Stuart was running Bruce Abbott and Jeffrey Combs and the original Megan Halsey through scenes, and she got cold feet. She said her mother had read the script, and so we replaced her. And a lot of my, you know, this was my first time directing, and really I learned directing by watching Stuart Gordon. You know what I mean? I made 3 movies with him, and I sat there and I watched how he did it, and I went through the whole process. And in a way, that was my school.
Not directing. A bad place to learn.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mean, I think maybe you're better off maybe starting earlier. You know, don't wait till you're, you know, 40 years old, you know. And I think that was when I was talking with her, I said, you know, that could have been, I was embarrassed and she wasn't at all. You know, she was just like, hey, you know, I remember you, blah, blah, blah. And I realized that was probably part of, you know, one of the things that Stuart was sure of, because he was a theater guy, it was a little bit uncompromising. And I'm not uncompromising like Stuart, for example, with the script. Like Stuart would almost tell the actors sometimes how to read the part or how to hold their glass, or, you know what I mean? Whereas I'm not that confident, and I'm usually not even that confident about the script. I remember on The Dentist once, there was a scene with Corbin Burnson, and I forget the name of the tax man, and there was some dialogue that I was not confident about. And so I talked to Corbin and I said, you know, I don't know about this. Maybe we could have a different dialogue there. And Corbin said, "Oh, I know how to do this. Don't worry, I'll do it." But that's my inclination, is I'll change the dialogue working with the actor. Whereas Stewart, never remember him doing that. He does rehearsals. I don't know, maybe he would change it in rehearsals, but he's a little more dictatorial about the, I guess it's, these are the lines, do it that way. Whereas I think I'm not that confident. But anyway, it was interesting. And I think Clarissa, she's such a weird character in society. There's only one line of dialogue I would like to edit out of the movie if I was George Lucas. And that's when she lets Billy loose from the noose and she says, "I love you." Right. Every time I see that, I just cringe. Oh my God, how could I? Because I had this idea, and I have had it a lot in movies, don't back off from sentimentality. But in that case, it just was wrong.
I mean, to be fair, I love that part because the expression he has on her face, where he's like, "Ooh, but you're that monster thing,"
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's a romp. It's a high school hijinks movie. I mean, in the '80s, it really hits it is the format for the high school hijinks movies. It is of its time.
Hey,
and I think his girlfriend Shauna is terrific.
Right.
Yes, she's
Heidi
hilarious.
Kozak, I think was her name.
Hilarious.
I just think it's so satirical. It's just
no, I think
so
there's a lot of humor in it. I just remembered, and I need to ask this because for me, for as much humor and satire as there is in the movie, the one part that always scares the crap out of me is the beginning where you have that variation on the Eton boating song that's known for, it was a school song associated with Eton College, and you do that variation with those creepy lyrics that start out about, when you're at the top of the class, you have fun and you drink, and then it gets into those lyrics about whether you're a killer or a sinner, and it's done in this very creepy way. How did the Eton boating song get included in, and where did that idea come from?
Well, that was the composers. I didn't suggest it to them.
It's brilliant.
I wouldn't even. I think the thing is that the two producers of the movie, Paul White and Keith Wally, are both Brits, and the movie and the composers are Brits, and the movie worked the best in UK. And I think part of it was they brought a class sensibility that in UK is like breathing. Nobody questions it. I mean, you can tell what somebody's class is by their accent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would never have known how to, of course, once I heard it, I go, oh, wow, that's, it's, it seems, and of course the Blue Danube, that's from 2001, we've seen that. But the whole idea, I think, especially in the UK, that means more than it does to us.
I know we've been going 2 hours here, so we have to let you go at some point. But I was also going to ask, with regards to Society, I know Zeph was saying he wanted to write a sequel to it. I know Stephen Biro of Unearthed Films wrote a treatment or a screenplay called Society 2 Body Modification. Were there ever any plans for a sequel?
I've tried. Zeph and I are just about finished with a novelization of Society.
Ooh.
So we're, writing a book about it, and it's the movie, right?
Mm.
So it'll be. I mean, it's pretty much done. We're just doing typos and stuff now. And I have I've done many deals to make a limited series of Society, and people talked to me about a sequel. They never panned out, and but I do have a pretty developed sequel to Society that takes place in these nightclubs, like on Hollywood Boulevard, Sunset Strip. You know, these clubs where you got to wait in line on the red carpet, and the guys there with the list, and you know how it's like that that whole thing where you can't get in. And I certainly, my experience of it is more when I'd go to the Cannes Film Festival. There's lots of parties with lots of famous people and stuff, and you got to be on the list. And then if you get in to the big party, you find out that all the big people, they're in the VIP room. So you got in, but you're not in the VIP room. And if you go into the VIP room, you find out there's a VVIP room, the real stars. And I did research with a guy that I have a daughter-in-law who is really into that scene, and so I went to one of her friends has a number of these clubs in LA, and I went before it started and see how they make the list, and I quizzed them, and I just spent the evening and talked to, and there's different ones. Some of them you got to kind of like go through a hotel kitchen to get to, you know, you don't even know it's there, you know, and some of them are right, you know, there's lots of levels of being kept out. And then there's lots of famous people. And then he's saying, no, after you get through the VVIP, he says, the big thing is, do you get to go to the after party? And then if you can get to the after party, and that'll be like in some Bel Air mansion, you get to the after party, and then you can't get upstairs. There's always a level that you're not let into. And he had some pretty amazing stories that I won't share because they're a bit obscene, but about famous people, and we're probably libelous, right? But so that world kind of fascinates me, because the thing about Society is that you're not a part of it. And I think that there's the story of Society with Bill Whitney, is that Bill was there, and when he saw how horrible what the reality was, he was disgusted. He was offended. And so the sequel that I worked with my partner John Penny, it has to do with a girl who wants to get in. She's just dying to. And of course, today, a Bill Whitney would want to be a part of it, because this is how corrupt we are now. I won't go into the details, but I do plan on, when we finish this novelization, I told Seth, I said, let's write a novel based on the sequel. Even if it doesn't get made into a movie, at least we'll get it out there. And I think that'll be a lot of fun, but I'd love to do a sequel to it. You know,
I want to see that.
And one of the things in the sequel is that the younger generation of Society have real problems with the older generation, because they're not going through the process, all the ritualistic aspects of the shunt. They're doing these pop-up shunts called splinters with very little prep. It's very messy. And they will just do a splinter at a fucking club in the back room. And the parents are going crazy. But I like that, like the generational conflict.
You have to have them
streaming.
live stream their pop-up shunt. Like it has to be,
Oh, of course,
you know,
everything's probably going to
yeah, it's
be,
all on
you know.
TikTok. You're like, we're
And the
gonna
people say, "Oh,
TikTok.
that's all AI shit."
Yeah. Like that would be the even funnier part, that they're live streaming their shunting, which the
I
idea.
mean, that's one of the terrible. I think that's one of the terrible things today is that I think people have just. I think that for the most part, people have just accepted they've accepted this kind of idea that anybody who's really wealthy is just better and smarter than us, that they more deserving, you know. And I think that's like just one of the worst things happening.
Yeah.
I'm just hoping that's going to change,
We can all hope. There is some hope in the labor movement that I have. Other than that, that's where I'm going to leave my hope there. And then the youth.
I went to see a projection of Society. This is a couple 3 years ago. I saw it listed somewhere, so I showed up, and it was I think it was called. I'm trying to remember the name of the group. It's like, is it the American Socialist Party or something? There's
DSA, Democratic Socialists of America.
Maybe that's
Okay.
it. And it was like in some weird outdoor place, and I went with my friend, and we chased it down. It was just like about 50 people with folding chairs, and I had a screen up. And then afterwards I said, "Hey, I'm the director. I want to take some questions." And it was just hilarious because I said, I want to see Society with a bunch of socialists, I want to get that audience. And
Did they
it was
dig
just
it?
a lot of fun. Of course they did, but I think they were all kind of intimidated or something, those groups, political groups, are very inbred, non-mainstream parties.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty inbred. It's not, I think even big time parties, it's a core of people that it's what your relationship was with the core. So I think they just weren't used to that. I don't know. I just wanted to hear the discussion afterwards. I wanted to hear somebody watch the movie, and it wasn't being watched as a horror movie. It was being watched as a socialist.
As a commentary on today's.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really interesting,
It is a great commentary. I mean, rewatching it again and checking out the girlfriend, the way she, was dying so hard to be kind of in the in crowd, I think kind of speaks to your idea of the sequel. People, dying to get in with these horrible people, because they're pretty horrible without even knowing about the shunting.
Oh yeah. Well, I think the shunting is I don't know. When you start dealing with people like Epstein and stuff like that, and he's not even really society, neither is Clinton. These guys are nouveau riche.
Mm-hmm.
You're not talking about the real society. I think that's where the people that the real society, we kind of don't even know their names. We look at celebrities and people who just made it big, Sam Bankman-Fried, I mean, these people aren't the ones that are, to my mind, there's families who really just own a lot. And why would anybody who has real power want anybody to know their name or their face and I'm not trying to be like QAnon here. I'm not trying to be like conspiracy, all this. I'm just kind of saying in a rational, logical way, people who shoot up in wealth and celebrity and power are not people who have real power.
I was just going to add to that, because I've spoken to people that are like really, really old money. Like I've spoken to like a baron out of like Ireland that's into filmmaking now, and it is interesting. I think that really, really old money, they experience life in such a different way because really everything they're getting is handed down to them. The estate, everything else is handed down to them. It's almost like they live in a different world. In a way, they are alien in the sense of they just live a very different life. And their mannerisms are different because they're kind of disconnected from the rest of us. They're so rich that there's sort of a disconnection from them with the rest of us.
I have a suggestion for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
I have a suggestion for a guest for you.
We're listening.
And okay, his name is Hamish McAlpine. Hamish McAlpine produced some horror movies like Ed Gein,
Okay.
The Hillside Strangler.
The Chuck Perillo movies. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the producer was a guy who was the production manager on Reanimator, Michael Muskell. Now Hamish is Scottish, but he his family, the McAlpines, I think they're like the biggest construction company in the UK, huge. And he got into movies, and he is upper class, by God, and you can't miss it. But he's into movies, and he had a company called Tartan Video.
They had all the Asian stuff.
His partner was the one that kind of ran it, but I think he killed himself, and Hamish ended up, it kind of got a little shaky after that. But in any case, Hamish, his father died early, just like a few years ago. And he now has inherited the title. I think his great-great-grandmother was like the lady in waiting for Queen somebody, like Queen Mary or something. So he's absolutely old money, or at least UK, pretty, old money. He's in the movie business. He's done horror movies that you have seen,
Mm-hmm.
and has actually kind of a oeuvre, right? He's got the serial killer movies.
Mm-hmm.
I think he would be a great guest for you because you could ask him about his horror movies, which I'm sure he'd be loved to talk to you about. And you could ask him about how his family and his upbringing influenced or informed his appreciation, taste, and production of movies. I'm not saying it would be an underhanded type of thing, but you might find that if you ask the right questions, you might get. Would you
be one we could talk to for an in to get a hold of him?
Yeah, I could give you the contact. But what I'll do is I'll give you the contact to Mike Muskell, and you might even want to have the two of them on. Mike Muskell was the guy that answered my ad when I was making an amateur movie with a 60 millimeter Bolex.
Okay.
And I brought him out to LA, and he ended up doing like big time special effects. I think he was the effects supervisor on Bride of Chucky, and he was on Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And he produced, I think he produced, he might have produced Ed Gein with Hamish. And Chuck Perillo directed. I think Stephen Johnston is another guy that he wrote those things. He's really good. But maybe you don't want to have Hamish on alone, right? Because maybe it might be hard. I don't know how good you are at kind of drawing people out. It's hard sometimes.
We have our ways.
Or you kind of have a couple other people. You don't do it just with Hamish. You do it with the writer, Mike Muskell, or with Steve Johnston. But anyway, I think this would be great because you would have absolutely somebody who is arguably from the society world,
Mm-hmm.
arguably, because this is, I think I don't know what his title is now, if he's an earl or whatever,
Jesus.
but I think who was he telling? Somebody told me, he said, I could never spend the money I got now. It's impossible, right? This is a big family, the Micheal Pines, they're Scottish. And you could ask him about his ancestry, where he goes, because when you're talking about British royalty, you're talking about society, man. They're not like the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs, they made a mistake. They didn't shunt. They didn't shunt. So, the concept of shunting is that when you have blue bloods
Mm-hmm.
and the blue bloods all intermarry, it's all incestuous.
Mm-hmm.
And if you totally intermarry, it's like the Habsburgs. They had the weird chin.
Mm-hmm.
They're idiots and all this because they're too narrow. So what's in the movie Society, the argument is that they bring these mongrels like Bill Whitney and raise them to give a better genetic kind of spread. Just like with dogs, if you have a German Shepherd and you're breeding them, you keep breeding German Shepherds, they end up with hip dysplasia.
Mm-hmm.
They just have problems. So you take a mongrel and you put it into the mix, and that kind of gets rid of it. That's what they do with dog breeding. So of course, that's what Society would do.
I was going to ask, with the society itself within the movie, we're never really told whether they're aliens from outer space, but I get the impression they've been with us for a long time, that they may not even be from outer space or something like that.
No, they're not from outer space. My theory, and I didn't want to do the blackboard where the doctor tells the story, because I thought, who needs that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're just going for the fun of it.
Mm-hmm.
But the logic is there. I've worked out all the logic. So back in caveman times, Neanderthal times, there was a kind of a parasite that came out from the earth, from underground, and it infected some proto-humans. And when it infected them, it gave them the power to dominate the others. And then they intermarried and created a literal blue bloods. So it's kind of like in 2001 when the monolith shows up and the cavemen, one of them touches it, then he can go kill the rest and be the leader. It's that kind of idea. Not that they came from outer space. I don't like the idea from outer space. That's more of a Lovecraft thing, I think. Coming from underground, from inside the earth, that indicates psychology, right? If it's something from outer space, that indicates it's something from outside of us. And so the conceit of society, if we want to get kind of all symbolic and everything, would be that we're talking about something that's inside of all of us, right? And that would be the earth. So it comes from our ground and it infects us, and then you create literal blue bloods like the Habsburgs, except in this case, they know better and can take these, strapping young men that aren't whose gene pools are quite broad, to spike the breed. And then you say, well, why do they have a whole shunting? Why do they do this whole thing about like fooling Bill and making a whole kind of theatrical mystery and you know what I mean? And why would they go through all that, the hunt? And why do they make a big deal? Why don't they just do a shunt to do it? Because that's all they have to do. And my answer is the same reason we don't just eat protein bars.
Yeah.
So we could, what we do is we have a 7-course meal
Mhm.
and we discuss how they killed the boar and where it came from, where the wine came from, and we have nice tables, and we have people waiting, and we have atmosphere and music, and we tell a story about our meals, and we make a whole big thing out of eating, when in fact, why do we have to? We don't have to do that. We're just getting nutrition, but we make it a whole ritualistic event. And that's my explanation for the shunting. It's like there's no business like show business, said Dr. Cleveland. It's
Right. They
just
really enjoy
fun.
it. The
Yeah,
society
because
enjoys it. It's a game.
exactly, and so do we. If we have the money to go to a big time restaurant or a pop-up restaurant
Mhm.
or any kind of special kind of event, we don't have to do that. We could take protein powder. I don't know.
Mhm.
We could, you know what I mean? But we don't do it that way because we're human. And I guess society is sort of human. They're parasites. They're parasites who have overcome their human hosts. They can't live on their own. So anyway, I think from my point of view, it's a true story.
That's how we watched it earlier today.
Absolutely.
It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad we were able to talk to you today. Thank you so much for taking more
It was
time than we thought
fun.
we were
It
going
was
to have.
fun.
Do you have anything to say on the way out, JG?
No, I just want to thank you so much, Brian. And one day we'll have to speak to you again because I didn't even get to ask you about working with Corbin Burnson and Paul Naschy. So maybe a
Well,
part two.
I'm always here, you know.
He
I'm
says
always,
that.
you know what? I'm always happy to talk about myself.
Well, look, I look forward to having
We
you.
all should be so lucky, right? That someone wants to listen to us. At my
I was
age,
also
I
going to say
really
real quick,
appreciate it.
I just wanted to say I'm glad you mentioned that you have a new film that you're producing, that Suitable Flesh movie, because Joe Lynch is a really underrated filmmaker when it comes to the newer horror directors.
Yeah, I mean, I was like executive producer. It's Barbara Crampton, Bob Portal, Joe Lynch, but I was involved with it, and it was a movie that I originated with Stuart Gordon and Dennis Paoli. So it was something we were going to do after Dagon. We just never got around to it. But Joe did it with Barbara. Hey, all kudos to Barbara, man. She is like she's a mini mogul.
She's killing it in the horror genre. She really is.
She's doing really great. I mean, she's just into it. You know, she's just really into it, and I appreciate that. I really admire her.
She's on my list of people I'd like to talk to.
Well, you should talk to her. She'll go on.
You act like it's so easy.
Well, yeah. I mean, you could either she would do it alone. You could do her alone. No, I think she would get on and talk because she's got tons of movies to talk about. If you wanted to talk about Suitable for, she did also Jacob's Wife.
Yeah.
Bob Portal. But you could have her and Bob Portal if they would. But Barbara, of course, has Reanimator, From Beyond. All the movies she did with Stewart, and I mean,
Castle Freak.
she had all the whole soap opera career.
Mm-hmm.
And why did she come back? She quit acting.
Yeah.
And married Bob Beckman, who's a financial guy in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. They moved to Marin County, and she raised a family. And then I saw her when at the opening of Reanimator the musical play here in LA, and she came. I hadn't seen her in years, and I asked her, and then I started seeing her at these screenings of weird cheap horror movies. Mm. And I was going, wow, she's just supporting all this oddball stuff, And she was in that movie Beyond the Gate,
Mm-hmm.
and Jackson Stewart, and I said, why did you decide to get back into horror movies? And she said, I mean, don't quote me because she can tell you the story, but I remember her saying that she says, I'd go to these dinners in San Francisco and of all these financial people, and all anybody wanted to talk about was the horror movies I was in. And I don't know, I guess that, or maybe she just thought, I want to reconnect. And you know what she did is they sold the house in Marin, and they bought a place just a couple miles from here. And she just became is absolutely determined. I mean, she just is, she's like producing, man. She's making projects, and I think
And
she's
still
a
as
very
beautiful as ever,
interesting
too.
person.
Yeah.
Huh?
Still as beautiful as ever, too.
What?
She's still as beautiful as ever.
Oh yeah. It's amazing. Some people get better with age,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
not me. But others, But I think that she would be. I think she's. I think she is. She's probably got a lot to talk about, and especially if you focus it on what she's trying to do now, not so much about.
That's kind of what I wanted to talk to her
talking
about.
Reanimator and From Beyond. I mean, she sends those interviews all the time. It's okay.
Yeah.
But the idea that she has, and especially if you mentioned Suitable Flash, then she's promoting it. Of course she's going to come on. Of course she's going to talk about it, because that's what it's all about, is getting people to talk about it and to be out there and to get your audience to even know about it, right? To know what she's doing.
Well, JG, we have a mission.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Hey, this was fun. I enjoyed talking to you guys, and anytime.
I'm holding you to part 2. We need to talk about Faust next time.
Ooh.
Well, I'm happy to talk about all those movies.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for checking it out. And we are out.
Okay. Adios, muchachos.
Back when Russia was the Union of Soviet Social Republics, and they'd say, "Oh, but aren't you so glad that you're in America?" I said, "Well, I know a lot of Russian filmmakers, and they have a lot more freedom than I have. All they have to do is be careful about criticizing the government."